All right, well, good afternoon. I am Senator Paul Formica, and I'd like to welcome you to our informational hour of conversation about offshore wind. We're going to be talking with Dr. Alan Lowdon, who is a Director of Strategic Development for National Offshore Wind Institute. In just a minute, I had the great pleasure of meeting Dr. Lowdon on a podcast that we did a few weeks ago with the Council of State Governments, of which I am the co-chair of the Northeast Region Energy Committee with Senator Pacheco from Massachusetts. And we had a number of folks on that geared for legislators that are involved with CSG. And we learned about best practices is what's happened with the offshore wind industry from the UK. It is a mature industry over in Europe and an emerging industry here in the United States. So I think it makes great sense to have people who've been through the grindstone a little bit, to kind of talk to us about lessons learned and maybe share some experiences. And Dr. Lowdon has graciously agreed to join me and us today to help share some of that. He will be presenting a slide and a video that we'll be able to share and use more often. If you have questions, please, submit them. I believe you can do it right, as you watch. But for some reason, if you need more involved questions or questions on any other issues relating to policy or process here in the state of Connecticut or the 20th District, you can access me at senatorformica.com. My email is paul.formica@cga.ct.gov. And we will be able to get back to you as quickly as we can with whatever information. So I believe you can ask questions from where you are. We'll be monitoring that chat room. I have my wonderful friend and colleague with Senate Republicans, Sarah Clark, is manning behind the scenes. And so she will help in any way technical to get us through this. But, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to be asking some questions, and we're going to be listening to the expert, Dr. Lowdon. And as I said, Doctor is a Director of Strategic Development for the offshore wind industry at Bristol Community College in Massachusetts. Dr. Lowdon has more than 20 years experience in the offshore wind industry. As Director of Strategic Development, he formulates and implements the strategic plans for the creation of the Global Wind Organization, accredited offshore wind training center as the centerpiece of the National Offshore Wind Institute. Dr. Lowdon is also a professor in practice at the University of Durham, a valued asset to the UK Department of International Trade Dealmakers Program, and he also serves as chair of the advisory board of the Durham University Energy Institute. And Doctor, thank you very much and welcome to the 20th District and to this podcast today. It is a bit after noon here. You are coming to us from across the pond, as they say.
I certainly am. Yes, 5:15 here.
So we do appreciate that, and you have quite a bit of expertise in offshore wind. We are in the beginning stages of this industry. We had the canary in the coal mine, which were the three wind turbines off Block Island some years ago, developed by Deepwater Wind, that seemed to kind of get through the process a little bit and spark the interest. And I think it made us realize that we have an opportunity here in this country. And many people don't know that the continental shelf, which extends out of the eastern seaboard of the United States, it almost is like a table that these wind turbines can be set on. And the Gulf Stream would act as an engine, pushing the wind up through there. So it seems that we have a good location and a good opportunity here to generate power through offshore wind. So I'll ask you to give any brief introduction that you think I've missed, or give us an idea of what we're going to talk about, and then we'll go back and forth with some questions and answers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Senator. It certainly is an exciting time for everybody involved in the industry. So you've already, I'm going to share my screen now so you can get the guts of what I'm going to present. Here we are. And okay, so yeah, what I want to do today is to give you a little bit of background into the collaboration which has been historically underway between the UK and the US in offshore wind. It isn't a new thing. It's a thing which has been going for, well, my involvement spans around 17 years, from early stage to current day. So you've already kindly introduced my three principal things that occupy my time these days. When I can get into the United States, I'm there about 60% of my time. Can't get in at the moment for a variety of reasons, as we all know. But I also act as a professor in practice, which is effectively an industrial professor, which helps shape the research agenda in one of the UK's most eminent universities, Durham University, which is in the top 5 in the UK. I also do some stuff for Her Majesty's government in terms of identifying and attracting early stage businesses to the UK to scale up, and in particular, technologies of relevance to the offshore wind sector. So that's the three things I do, but today we're principally focused on my role as Director of Strategic Development at the National Offshore Wind Institute, which is being promoted heavily on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, which is based in New Bedford, southern Massachusetts, and which is starting to take shape. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well as things progress. So the format of the talk today, we're going to talk, I want to really get a point across which relates to levelized cost of energy. It's a really important factor, parameter, which needs to be understood by those who are interested in the industry and those who are already either in the industry or looking to get into it. I'll talk a little bit about UK experiences and the US position as well. Then we'll move on to a little chat about workforce development in terms of direct jobs, supply chain opportunities, which are termed indirect jobs, and how that spawned the National Offshore Wind Institute, the NAWI. And also, because it's really quite close to my heart and it's a fantastic axis of collaboration at the moment, I'll talk about UK-US research, development and innovation collaboration, both historically, but also talk about some of the current projects and some of the current initiatives which are underway. And I'll leave the presentation with a short 5-minute video, which is a public domain video, which I've titled One Developer's Approach to Working with Fishermen. And I think it's really important because there's a lot of fear in the UK at the time when the industry came to life. And this video helps to allay some of those concerns. So I'll be talking for about 20 minutes and then we'll take some questions. The 5-minute video on top as well, of course. Okay, so levelized cost of energy. I'm an applied mathematician by training. I specialized in fluid dynamics, so I've been in electricity, water, gas, oil, and now renewables. So the presentation isn't complete without an equation for me. So here's the equation. The levelized cost of energy is defined as life cycle cost of energy production in dollars divided by life cycle energy generated in megawatt hours. So that's a very simple equation. It's quite complex behind those, the numerator and the denominator are quite complex in terms of their components, and we'll touch upon some of those in a moment. But what I want to get across is that there's a very important equation at play here, a very important parameter, which the industry observes and tracks quite closely, and that's LCOE. So any operational strategy, and this is where jobs start to emerge in terms of what I'm saying, You must minimize the numerator, the line on top. So minimize the life cycle cost of energy production, and at the same time, maximize the denominator. And by doing both of those things at the same time, you keep levelized cost of energy in check, if not reducing it. So in terms of minimizing the numerator, you need to make sure that you get the cost of energy production is as small as it possibly can be. So you do that by optimizing your asset performance, by engaging in strategic operations and maintenance activities. You also go about reducing the risk, which is perceived and which is actual, by reducing the turbine exposure, reducing the failure rates of the turbines, et cetera, et cetera. And this translates into a lower insurance premium, which features in that top line, and also a lower cost of capital, which features in the price of borrowing money. And of course, we deploy the most necessary technologies to give us those insights. In terms of the denominator, the bit on the bottom, we simply use larger turbines. Larger turbines generate more power, and if you can keep them going for longer, you increase their yield, i.e. how much energy you get from them. And you also, by doing that, you create effectively more resilient assets. So the longer the turbines are in operation, the more power you get out of them, the more energy you produce. And so the denominator becomes bigger and bigger and bigger over time. So you can imagine there's jobs in this. There's a lot of jobs in operations and maintenance, strategic asset management, risk understanding with ICT, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. These are high quality platform technologies which can be deployed in the sector to keep this LCOE in check. So I'm just trying to drip feed the concept of this parameter and its importance. So the UK, about 2014, I pulled a figure from that period, the LCOE in 2014 sat at around about equivalent to $210 per megawatt hour. It's currently 60. So all of the stuff I've just mentioned, the numerator and denominator management, have driven that cost down from that 210 figure to 60. The US has got a fantastic opportunity to continue that trend downwards in its own right, given the specifics of the US offshore wind industry, but it can also inadvertently, if it's not careful, start to nudge this figure upwards. And that will play into the hands of people who are trying to undermine the sector. And we had that in the UK as well. But some of the specifics which the US needs to be aware of in terms of its position versus the position in the UK and the rest of Europe is we don't have hurricanes in the North Sea. We don't have much seismic activity in the North Sea. The level of unionization in the UK is nowhere near what it used to be 30 years ago. And in the US, we have, of course, the Jones Act, which is often cited as being something to overcome. It's there, it needs to be managed. It's as simple as that. But these are specifics to the US offshore wind sector. So inadvertently increasing the levelized cost of energy is not something you want to do. Similarly, the offshore renewable energy certification system for tax incentivization has been something which has been waxed and waned in the US, which needs to have a degree of stability around it to carry it into the next generation of offshore wind. Indeed, if that's the appropriate taxation metric or mechanism to use. But as it stands today, we're seeing figures of LCOE in the US quoted as between $80 and $110 a megawatt hour. So this is not unusual. This is a nascent industry with immature supply chains, heavy reliance on importation with the importation taxation, which goes with that, which is all reflected in those figures. Once the supply chains become matured, the jobs are created, and the indigenous industries start to roll, then those figures will be positively impacted. So that said, what are we trying to do in the United States? So this is something which I've become increasingly close to over the last couple of years, working in the capacity which the Senator described. So what we're doing here is trying to create more and better jobs. So there's a lot of work going on in the background to understanding what level of job creation there could be. And one of those studies was a 2018 Massachusetts Clean Energy Study on workforce development, which was undertaken by UMass Dartmouth and also Bristol Community College. And there was an example used of the installation of 1.6 gigawatts over an 8-year period. What job impact would that have? The analysis, which was also done in conjunction with the National Renewable Energy Lab, pointed to between 7,000 and 10,000 direct and indirect jobs in the construction phase. That's the CapEx phase. Whereas 700 to 1,700 jobs were created annually, that's important, in the operations and maintenance phase, the so-termed OPEX phase. So over a 25-year wind farm nominal life, we're talking around 17,500 to 42,500 jobs being created in operations and maintenance. So it's also important to understand in the sector that the minute that you construct a turbine and it starts to rotate, then your operations and maintenance phase starts for that machine. So when you are constructing a wind farm, it takes a period of time for that wind farm to be built out. However, from day one, the first turbine erected and the first turbine commissioned, the warranty on that turbine starts, and you need to operate it and maintain it in line with the warranty provision. So these aren't two phases, these run concurrently from the minute that the first turbine is commissioned. So in response to this opportunity, there's two aspects of this: construction jobs and operations and maintenance jobs. The National Offshore Wind Institute was conceived. This is sited in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and we're currently going through a 30,000 square foot building refurbishment. It expects to be operational around about this time next year, because we have a fit out, we have a certification, we have a train the trainer program to engage with, and it's exciting times. And you will see on YouTube, you'll see on Twitter and LinkedIn feeds the recent congressional delegation that was there last week to look at the progress to date. Really exciting. In last summer, around about this time, we signed an agreement with Maersk Training of Denmark to be our strategic partners for the development of this facility. Maersk Training is one of the globally leading training providers, for offshore industries, and offshore wind is one of them. So we've partnered with Maersk Training's UK staff to design, to act as purchasing agents, to act as train the trainer facilitators, and ultimately to certify the National Offshore Wind Institute to global wind organization standards. So the first two courses, which are the prerequisites to go offshore, basic safety training is the prerequisite. And if you're going to do any technical work, you need basic technical training as well. So those two courses are going to come to life as the first courses to be run from the NAUI. But other GWO courses, and there's a whole spectrum of them, will follow thereafter. And that includes blade repair, slinger signaler courses, advanced safety training, firefighting and fire training, all of that type of thing is in there ready to go. In the meantime, because we're looking to build a brand and looking to build momentum and also get awareness of the sector up and running, we are raising awareness across the would-be supply chain via continuous professional development courses. So there's a whole myriad of opportunity for different subsectors to take advantage of the industry. So the service sectors, safety critical industries, professional services firms, the list goes on. So typically hoteliers, caterers, IT professionals, logistics experts, food and drink providers, transportation, lawyers, consultants, financiers, insurance brokers have all got a role to play in this sector. So this is the supply chain which the US will develop and develop very quickly, in my opinion. Moving forward a little bit, probably towards the end of 2022, I will be instigating an innovation and entrepreneurship center to be added onto the NAUI. So that will link with Venture Cafe Providence, UMass Dartmouth, some of the stuff at Tufts University, and in the UK, Durham Business School. And the idea here is to give people who are active in the industry or who want to get into the industry and have good ideas about how to solve problems, give them the wherewithal and means by which they can commercialize their ideas and set up businesses as a result. So the jobs is not just about the direct jobs in the supply chain, it's about creating new businesses which can enter that supply chain and create value as a result for the industry. One of the interesting things that we're doing is actually reaching out to the wider New England area. We're having a great reception on this. So all of the New England states, we're looking to establish New England capacity, not just Massachusetts capacity, New England capacity, because there's the opportunity to work together, to load share, to pass courses into other institutions that may not want to go through all of the accreditation that we're going through, so we could license the NAWI model into other places and keep the quality assurance with our relationship with Maersk as the overseer. One of the interesting things which has happened, of course, is that as a Brit coming into the US, I've brought relationships from the UK in there, from Europe in there, but I've also been a long-standing supporter of the US industry through my work there. So I've been able to bring existing US relationships to the US. So the National Renewable Energy Lab, the Department of Energy, and the University of Colorado at Boulder in particular have got great technologies which are of relevance to the offshore wind sector, which we've been able to fast track into the NAWI. So that's the workforce development, supply chain, and the creation of the NAWI and what it's going to do. So really exciting times, and other states are looking at equivalent types of projects, but we think that the word national is there for a reason. We want to be the leading institution to support the industry on the Eastern Seaboard in the first instance. So looking at some of the more, I suppose, academic and innovative and entrepreneurial activities which have been between the two countries. Back in 2006, I was instrumental in getting a collaborative R&D agreement, a CRADA, established between what was then the National Renewable Energy Centre in the UK and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the United States, and in particular the Wind Technology Testing Centre in Charlestown in Boston, established. So we had a transfer of personnel, and we also had a transfer of thinking. We did joint patent filing, and we did a lot of joint testing and demonstration. Fantastic early stage relationship. That ran for 10 years. I was involved in probably the first 5 years of that, and it continues to be the bedrock of relationships which have been developed since. So just back to the levelized cost of energy, just bringing some of the parameters in it to light a little bit. What we see is if we can use innovation, research, development to get at some of these parameters and make them, well, drop the numbers in terms of those percentages, it's going to be a good thing. So installation logistics is a key thing which we are faced with. You know, there's a whole science behind installation logistics. We've mentioned operations and maintenance, but it accounts for around about 28% of the levelized cost of energy. It's a big number. And if you can shave some of that percentage off, you're doing a good thing. Project financing as well has increasingly become more sophisticated. The perception and the reality of risk profiles in the industry has been dealt with in Europe and in the UK, but it hasn't been eliminated. So there is risk in the sector still, which is usually priced into the insurance premiums or the project financing coupons, the interest rates, which are charged for the money which is lent to the sector. But I put the next point in because it's really important. The City of London is the world's center of excellence for insurance. But 70% of the insurance claims which relate to offshore wind, in the City of London relate to cable failure. So cabling is such an important thing, and that links directly with the concerns of the fishing community as to how they navigate such infrastructure. I'll come on to that a little bit in a moment. In the box, you see some of the UK-US innovation vectors which are underway. I won't go through them all, but there's a very, very, very interesting project underway at the moment, which is the UK-US government facilitation project, which looks at the instrumentation of wind farms from a a smart IoT, smart asset management point of view. So we're instrumenting Block Island, which sits behind me on this screen, and we're instrumenting an equivalent in the UK, in Scotland, and the data streams are being compared to draw inference from what we find in terms of turbine performance, ocean interaction with the turbines, degradation and aging mechanisms in the blades, that type of thing. It's a really, really, really interesting project, and it's just started around about 4 months ago. But there's all manner of other things going on. University interaction is getting stronger. The principal universities active in offshore wind space in the UK are teaming up with those in the US. So it's really exciting to have this dynamic underway. So some of the innovation focal points I've already touched upon: logistics, the construction phase. The one in the middle with the turbines and the wakes, as you can see, that's Horns Rev wind farm off the coast of Denmark. And this is a classic example of a wind farm which is interacting with, which is very interactive, shall we say. So the wind blows on the front line of turbines. The turbines shed the wind in terms of the wake. The wake interacts with the turbines that you probably can't see, which are around about 500 yards behind the first ones, such that the flow field which impinges upon those turbines is turbulent. And that is a bad thing. It's a bad thing because you reduce the energy output from the turbines, you reduce the yield, which means that it impacts your levelized cost of energy negatively. So turbine array design is an extremely important thing to get to grips with. And NREL in Golden, Colorado are leading lights on this now. Fantastic team that they have working on this. The cabling, one or two things I want to say about the cabling. I've mentioned the importance of cabling in terms of it being a big risk factor. What we have to do when we lay cables is lay them correctly, so we don't inadvertently put residual stresses in the cable, which can lead to failure. But we also, when they're lying on the ocean floor, we need to protect them. So you protect them through either burying the cable in the ocean floor, and there's an environmental consequence of doing that potentially, or you create artificial reefs over the cables by putting mattresses or rocks so that the cables are covered and can't move, because the ocean floor, believe it or not, is quite a dynamic environment. The ocean causes the cables to oscillate, and that can increase the stress concentrations and lead to failures. So cable monitoring is an extremely important aspect of the sector, understanding what risk the cable is exposed to and understanding its performance state. But you can conceive there's jobs across that spectrum, high quality, really important jobs, which are going to be increasingly required by the US teams and the developers and the consultants and all of the people who are there to support that supply chain and develop that supply chain both technically and also strategically, because this is such an important space. I pulled 4 examples out there. There are at least another 40. So that's just an indication of what's going on and why it's important to keep abreast of the technological advancements. And we also need to be very cognizant that this is a moving position. Only 6 years ago, we were talking about 6 megawatt turbines. Today, we're talking about 12 megawatt, 14 megawatt turbines. So the technology is advancing at a pace, and we need to keep up with that. Okay, so what I want to do now is just to share a video with you, because cognizant of the fact that the UK and the US have got fishing industries of significance, and there has been concern in these industries about the impact on the fisheries of offshore wind. I pulled this video off YouTube, and it's one developer's research-led approach to reducing the risk, reducing the perception of risk, but also creating partnerships which are there for the long run, so that the fishing industry and the offshore wind industry can live side by side. It's got subtitles because some of these guys' English accents are a little bit difficult to follow. So it has got subtitles, and it's attributed to Ørsted, who obviously have developed Block Island behind me. So it's 5 minutes, and I hope you find it of interest.
It's not a job, it's a way of life. You've got to love it to do it, and you've got to take the rough with the smooth. These guys have fished these grounds for 30 years. It just so happens that Westerners Rough Wind Farm was going to be built on best lobster fishing grounds in Europe. These guys thought they were going to lose the businesses over it. They were terrified because it was new to them. We've got a lot of families that have third generation fishermen here.
I've been fishing since I was 16. This isn't the type of job where you're waiting for Friday. We were a young business. Nobody knew how a wind farm interacts with your fishing.
So HFIG was formed to bring the voices of fishermen to have one voice to speak for the industry.
The research first started due to the fishermen having concerns about the development of the offshore wind farm in one of the main lobster fisheries. The fishery invested in their own research vessel, in collaboration with Ørsted, developed a monitoring program. We've done subsequent surveys for the last 6 years.
During surveys, we'll enter the wind farm, we'll haul a fleet of lobster pots. We're roughly 500 metres from any turbine. Inside the wind farm, especially if we're up close to one of the turbines, it's quite impressive. And it's very easy to navigate through. We introduced our first buried lobsters, egg-bearing hens. Within 3 days, we had our first stage 1 larvae released into the tanks.
Mother Nature is the best hatchery out there. You cannot do research on lobster larvae out in the open ocean because their whole job is to hide from predators. So by bringing them into the laboratory, we can control various environmental parameters, do the study that we're interested in, and at completion of that study, we can then release them. For us to go from a theoretical design on paper to a system that is now operational and giving us stage 5 lobster has been an incredible success story. We wouldn't have been able to do it if it wasn't from the help from Ørsted.
Initially, the fishing industry did not want this wind farm built, thought it was going to destroy their prime lobster grounds. Our results have shown that it actually hasn't had an overall effect, and we are seeing consistent catch rates throughout the entire 7-year period.
There's a quote, for every 1 fisherman offshore, then there's another 6 jobs on land. Now we're in a place where we're successfully coexisting with the fishing industry. A lot of the fishing industry are suggesting to other offshore wind developers that they do the same thing as what Ørsted are doing. If that isn't a good thing, then I don't know what is.
It's green energy, it's coming. You've got to work alongside it. It's going to happen no matter what. It has worked, and it's worked well.
I feel that minds have been changed from these relationships that were built with Ørsted. And I feel like we've had a big part to play in that. These young lads that's coming through, they're the future of the job. Our fishery can keep flourishing. It's only a good thing.
Okay. So I think that's given you a bit of an idea as to how the industry has embraced the fishing sector. I'll just get rid of this stuck, I think, my presentation. Yeah, okay, thanks. It's given you an idea about how the fishing industry has overcome that initial resistance to the offshore wind farm's existence. And I think it's really important to point out that that was all done through partnership. And that's one of the things that we've seen in the UK is the willingness for both sides to understand each other's position and to find some middle ground. But in particular, I like that particular video because it's a scientific-led approach to dispelling some kind of myths and also showing people that the risk was a perceived risk in many ways and that the sectors can coexist. So I think there's lots of learnings in that for the US industry, and I sort of point to something at the end of this summarizing slide. So just in summary for what we discussed, I've labeled the levelized cost of energy because it is a dominant parameter in the sector. It's important to understand its existence and the role that it plays in shaping thinking. The UK and the US have developed offshore wind relationships over 16 to 17 years, in my case, probably longer in other people's cases. We had a significant input into the Power US and NYSERDA solicitations, which came out around about 2017, which you're now seeing the calls for proposals from NYSERDA to do high quality research of an ocean bearing nature, but also of an asset development and an operations and maintenance nature as well. We've got the academic linkages in place. I've mentioned those. The UK Government Science and Innovation Network's been a great facilitator. It sits within the embassy in Washington, but also in the consulates around the US to facilitate access to US scientists and UK scientists to come together to create and solve create solutions to the problems that have been identified. So we work with the consulates, we work with the embassy as well, very important. I've mentioned this Department of Energy and UK, which is Innovate UK, is a UK government innovation agency, the bilateral innovation funding, which is starting to happen, which is great to see, and that project where we're instrumenting the wind farms either side of the pond. So my involvement at Bristol Community College and in the National Offshore Wind sector and National Offshore Wind Institute has been nurtured over around about 8 years. I was party to inbound missions from New England in particular and down to the Carolinas. And over time, we built up relationships. And when the opportunity came for me to take part in the development of the NAUI, I jumped at the opportunity. It's a privilege. So the NAUI is on its way. Watch out for more news. It's going to be shaped with UK expertise, but increasingly that expertise will be coming from the indigenous supply chain in and around the center in Massachusetts and further afield around New England. But the US is actually entering a golden age, in my opinion. In my previous presentation, I did have a full slide on this, but I've reduced it to one line. And that golden age could well be the dawn of floating offshore wind. The Senator, he described the continental shelf at the beginning of this presentation, but the deeper waters offer a huge wind resource. Further you go offshore, the better the wind profile, the better the wind speed, and also the better the power production. The challenge, of course, is it's further offshore, so you need to get the electrons back to shore. But all of these things are being grappled with now. And it's my prediction that within 15 years, the United States will be the global leader in floating offshore wind. And as we've seen, the fishermen and the offshore wind developers must coexist. So proactive engagement is necessary. And so, one concept which I think is really feasible is for a New England and an Old England Fishermen's Alliance to be created, where these learnings are shared at a peer-to-peer level, and a sector-to-sector level, so people can speak the same language and they can start to permeate the psyche of those who are feeling concerned or challenged with the emergence of the industry in the United States. There's plenty of examples of how these problems have been overcome in the UK and wider in the European market as well. So really, that's it from me. Thank you very much for your time. I hope there's been something in there of interest. It's a vast industry. It's going to be really exciting for the United States to stamp its global mark on this, with huge export potential in the floating sector, as I mentioned earlier. Please get in touch. There are two principal email addresses, professional ones, the Bristol one and the Durham one, where, as the Senator said, I'm a professor in practice trying to shape the industrial agenda for the academics. So there we are. I hope that was of interest, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Doctor. That was very informative, and I appreciate how you condensed it, to really fit our conversation today. And I think there's some very exciting opportunities that you brought up. NAUI, for example, which will be in New Bedford as a resource for all of us, I would expect, once it gets going. And
correct.
You'll be able to sign up and go take courses or seminars, or is it more set up like a college, or what?
Yeah, what we're doing is, good question. I've just completed the first, it's called Offshore Wind Orientation course. It goes live, I think it's the August 16th. And it's 2 times 2 hours, and it's a run through the industry, effectively, touching on a lot of the stuff I've touched upon today, but bringing it to life over 2 blocks of 2 hours. So it's a professional development course, and it's there for people to access as they see fit.
And you can purchase that. And
yeah, it's open now. Registration.
What's that?
Registration is open. Yep.
Yep. And that's this August. I saw 2022 in your information as being open, but you're going to do something as early as this August or next August?
This is the precursor to the physical asset being available, is to do the remote sort of educational piece for people who are looking to get into the sector or just want to be better informed about what it is. Yeah. So yeah, it's even though I say it myself, I was quite pleased with the style and the level of detail which I was able to get into this 2 lots of 2 hours. So it's a bit of a challenge, but I think it's okay. You'll enjoy it if you take it.
Excellent, good. And I look forward to to taking that myself, and hopefully we'll promote it as best we can.
Yeah, there will be another 6 which follow, but which will go into the deeper dives into some of the specific aspects which I touch upon in the first course.
I'm sure there'll be many people that'll be very interested in that. New London has been targeted as a great opportunity for offshore wind because of its location, its deep water availability. There are no obstructions to get in and out of the port, and it's a direct line to some of these locations where these turbines are going to be constructed. And there's been some question about a number of jobs that may be created, both for the industry on the water and for the support industry. And I think you touched on the numbers. I think you said between 17,000 and 42,000 in your presentation as support jobs. And New London is ripe for that. The areas between New Haven, New London, and Norwich here could certainly support operations of assembly plants, or perhaps small manufacturing or other support services that may be necessary. But I was impressed when you listed hotels and caterers and lawyers and finance people, and I think that's a whole demographic that we hadn't thought of here.
Yeah, it's an important demographic as well, because it's quite easy for that to be overlooked, because people see the big bits of kit, they see the engineering, they see the construction, they see the seafaring aspects, but what they don't see is the fact that people going offshore, men and women, need to be hoteled, they need to be fed, they need to be watered, they need to be chauffeured around. So all of these people benefit from the existence of this industry in the vicinity of where the action is. So and also the professional services firms in particular are going to be very highly in demand because of the contractual aspects to constructing a wind farm.
You know, I'm looking at one of the questions is from Steve on the chat room. How many jobs offshore wind could create? I think it's very difficult to say, but if you spread it out through the community and through the landscape of all of the potential jobs, I mean, it's going to be substantial, I would think, once this program begins to develop. Everybody thinks, you know, you build a wind turbine and it sits out there and runs for a while and you have maintenance jobs. But I don't think we're fully grasping here the number and the impact that it will have within our way of life as these things begin to merge. New London has
an example. Excuse me for cutting across. One excellent example for those online who are interested. If you Google the port of Grimsby in the UK, it was solely reliant on fishing around about 30 years ago, maybe. You look at it now, and it's probably one of the leading operations and maintenance bases in Europe for the offshore wind sector. It's been totally transformed. The fishing still exists, but the wasteland, which was created through the decline in fishing, has been repurposed, and it's now, you know, as we've discussed, the O&M side of the sector has taken it on board. In Ørsted, again, back to Ørsted, they have been instrumental in revitalizing that part of the UK. So the UK Eastern Seaboard equivalent.
And we have, you know, Ørsted partnering with Eversource here. We'll get into some questions I have about that in a few minutes, but and then Vineyard Wind down in Bridgeport. And I think Connecticut is going to benefit on both ends of the eastern part of our state as a result of,
sure,
of those. So I lost my train of thought there. A couple of other questions I'll just go to. Subsidies and tax incentives was one question that's asked in the chat. Was that an important criteria in developing the wind turbines in Europe, or you know, we're looking at that. Some of those tax incentives expired last December, but I'm not sure what the new administration is going to come up with. So,
yeah,
is this kind of getting off its training wheels as an industry?
Yeah, it certainly is. If you look at the UK figures for levelized cost of energy now, which is it's about 50% less than a traditional coal-fired power station energy production cost. It's around about 100% less, well, not 100%, but 50% less than the baseload nuclear plant, which the UK is bringing online. And it's also significantly less than combined cycle gas turbine technology. It wasn't in the beginning. If you remember the figure which I quoted of around about $210 per megawatt hour in 2014, at that stage, there was still a taxation subsidy in place to incentivize offshore wind, as there had been for onshore wind and as there had been for wave and tidal power as well. However, we moved to more of a free market mechanism at the end of, what are we now, about 2017? So we moved to a free market mechanism. Are we okay still? Can you still see me?
Yep.
Yeah, we moved to a free market mechanism in 2017 where there's a bidding process which is put in place for the developers to bid a price for the electricity supplied and to stick to that price during the production of that electricity over the 25-year period of a wind farm. So I think taxation incentives, when the levelized cost of energy, when the industry is still immature, is only right and proper. And each technology that we know of has had those incentives placed alongside them. It's just that they were usually under the radar. So it's a very important aspect to facilitate the entry of new technologies into the market. It should not last forever, because ultimately these technologies will stand on their own 2 feet, they will not need subsidies. And at that stage, it's only right and proper that those taxation benefits are diverted to other things. But that's the way it went in the UK, and now we are subsidy free.
Subsidy free, and then I think what people don't realize is the next step in that is that the dollars that are created within the community and the support vendors and all of the other opportunities that you suggest will create revenue that will offset and replace the tax subsidies
Sure.
that people paid over time. And I think that, that's going to be an important part of where we are. You mentioned storms, no hurricanes and big storms over in the UK. We certainly have those here. There was a lot of mention made about the freeze in Texas that kind of crippled temporarily the wind turbine industry there. And, I don't think that people realize that those installations in the Gulf of Mexico there of Texas were, not winterized because nobody expected that kind of weather. So therefore, they couldn't withstand the cold. But where you are in Europe and where we would be up here, adding, I don't know if it's simply said, but adding antifreeze to the system would winterize it. We wouldn't see that particular problem. But can they stand up to heavy winds, and do you shut them down when those winds occur, or do you take advantage of them somehow?
Yeah, there's two aspects to that. The first aspect is in extreme weather temperature conditions, in the UK, in the rest of Europe, for example, then you have a mechanism in the blade which actually prevents the blade from freezing. So it's winterized at the point of design. That's the first thing. Whereas nobody expected those extreme weather conditions to be hitting Texas. So, and there was also an issue with the freezing of gas in combined cycle gas turbine pipes, which caused a major issue because there is water content in gas. On top of that, the wind profiles are extremely important, because typically a wind turbine will come into action at a wind speed of around 5 meters per second. I'm using metric because that's the cited numbers. About 5 meters per second wind speed. It would typically cut out at 25 to 30 meters per second wind speed on a traditional gearbox design. So that's such that we don't want the turbine hyper rotating, because the gearbox can cause the friction in the gearbox can create a fire. So typically there's a mechanism in the gearbox which prevents the gearbox from over rotating. So you sort of reduce the rotational aspects of the gearbox when you are at extreme wind speeds. You also have the opportunity to what's called feather the blades, which is to make the blades less exposed to the incident wind flow. So all of this is automated. It's all done on a control algorithm basis. So, and it's all relayed back to a control center, so people can take charge of these assets back to the levelized cost of energy, uptime, yield, making sure they're available for an optimum period of time, but without exposing the turbines to overly stressed experiences. So yeah, there's a whole science, and the engineering is very much associated with keeping these assets in a safe and proper format. But there are now electromagnetic gearboxes which get away from some of that.
You don't have any concern then with 100-mile-an-hour wind from a temporary hurricane event over a day or two?
No, the turbine will not be rotating in its traditional way and generating power, but it will be protected by the mechanisms which operate it.
And the base, whether it's a gravity a foundation base or whether it's the other, will hold the turbine there. We're not looking at potentially having turbines flying around the ocean.
No. I mean, the gravity-based foundation is used for shallower waters. So the hurricanes tend to be further out at sea. So, further out in the ocean. The other structures, there's jacket structures, which are more like oil and gas platforms.
Yep.
You've got monopiles, which is, as in the name suggests, it's a single structure piled into the sea, into the ocean floor, and it's well understood. There are issues associated with the ongoing operation of some of these assets, because you do get a phenomenon called washout, which happens at the bottom of the turbine, where the turbine, the monopile, goes into the seabed. You can get some excavation just through the wave dynamics and the sea dynamics in the vicinity of that. It's caused by what's called downwash vortices, which are basically recirculating water, which washes out some of the areas to the bottom. But there are technological solutions now which are applied at the point of construction.
Okay. So you've had about 30 years, 20 years experience with, not yourself personally, but the industry in pretty much.
About 20 years. I mean, yeah, I have a power generation background, so it's just another power station in many ways. But yeah, about 20 years in offshore wind in the UK in various shapes and forms.
And so your primary power source prior to wind offshore energy, was it natural gas or nuclear, or what? And what did this replace, and has it been successful in replacing it?
Yeah, there's a thing which dictates the energy mix of any nation, and it was more popular in terms of being quoted than it is today, but it was called the load duration curve, and it was the amalgamation of different technologies to form your energy mix. So in the UK, and it is still the case, the base load is provided by nuclear power plant. Prior to the advent of wind at scale, then the next up the line was coal-fired stations. So the coal-fired power stations were the things which were the workhorses of the UK the electricity system. And then you would have combined cycle gas turbines, open cycle gas turbine technology on top of that, and then you might have some minor technologies like hydro, pumped hydro, and some small scale wave and tidal devices if they were coming on the grid. That was probably 25 years ago. Today, we regularly have no coal-fired power stations operating on the grid, and that's been replaced by offshore wind. We have a lot of interconnectors now to the UK, which we bring in nuclear power from France, from hydropower generated electrons from Norway, similarly through Belgium. So we have a lot of interconnections with interconnectors which keep us going, but they are not, from an energy security point of view, they are, there's a potential risk there. But increasingly, as the build-out program of offshore wind comes on, then we'll be less reliant on taking electrons through those interconnectors, and we'll be using the electrons generated in the ocean, coupled with energy storage, of course.
Yeah, which is the next frontier, I think, right? And,
correct. Correct.
So we here in Connecticut are about 45% natural gas, about 45% nuclear as a base load, and then the rest is here or there for renewables. These renewables are intermittent resources, probably more so offshore where there's a more steady supply of wind. But are you in offshore wind in the 60+% capacity rating, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting there. Again, the capacity factors are oft-cited. Clearly, the bigger the turbines in general, the better the capacity factor, because they're more robust and resilient and can be operated in a slightly different way. But yeah, 60%, 45 was probably where we started. It's edging up through the 50s and into the 60s. Yes.
And that's factored into what you call the levelized cost of energy going forth. So, if it's not operating one day, it's, very calm out there and nothing is happening. It's still been factored into the cost expectations through the formula that you suggested.
And also through the bid pricing mechanism, which is in play now. So no matter what happens, the developer will place their bet on a particular strike price, it's called, for electricity being sold into the market. So they will say, we will sell it at this price, and that will then dictate what they can and can't do in terms of they have to match it. They have to operate themselves to be able to hit that strike price.
So standard service here for our customers and the ratepayers in Connecticut is offered by the big utility at roughly 8 or 9 cents per kilowatt.
Yeah.
There's been, criticism about offshore wind being double that. I think your presentation about the levelized cost of energy and the 210 versus the 60 that it's down to now indicates a downward trend. Do you think that we'll be able to match that 8-9% over time when we mature, as I probably, for lack of a better word?
I mean, the only difference between what's happening in the US and what's happened in the UK is time. So it hasn't been an easy ride, and I've been involved in the US offshore wind scene where it's waxed and waned. I was involved in fishermen's, and I was involved in Cape Wind many years ago, and they died a death, but they've come back in a different form. So it's all about willingness. It's all about maturity of supply chains. It's all about the industry has matured from the point of view of the turbine sizes have made it more cost effective. So if you point back to that equation which I popped up there, all of the factors which are in that equation, a lot of them have reached pseudo maturity. The US has got an opportunity to further drive down those costs. And when the US does something, it does it. It's state its claim. It wants this industry to succeed in across the US, not just on the eastern seaboard, but across the US. And it will drive down the levelized cost of energy once the manufacturing plants come to town, once the supply chain, which I've mentioned on numerous occasions on this presentation, starts to mature. You'll see the impact on the levelized cost of energy, and the concerns that the ratepayers will have is that they're paying too much for their electrons will gradually diminish over time as there is convergence between the prices we see today, the prices which they may have to pay for an interim period while that supply chain starts to mature. And also, who's to say that there won't be new financial incentives and equivalent electricity charging mechanisms designed, which are US unique? That debate is raging as well now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We're pushing for carbon-free grids by 2030 to 2050. Taking your time frame of 20 years that Europe has kind of been in this, it seems hopeful but not practical to me. And I mean, I know we're moving toward it, and the people want less reliance on fossil fuels, and your indication about what happened with the coal plants over there in the UK is an indication that there is a reduction expected.
Sure.
I'm a little wary about that fast of a time transfer, but
I think there's a whole lot of parameters which are way beyond offshore wind factored into that expectation. So the electrification of heat is a key one. That's a science in its own right. The hydrogen agenda is starting to blossom, and that will have an impact in terms of displacement of methane from the system. So all of these things in the electric vehicle revolution, the whole issue around energy storage, as we touched upon, all of these are factors which will impinge upon that target being achievable or not. I think it is a stretch target, and I think all governments create stretch targets. Yeah. So it's an aspiration, and I think it's certainly something which could be impacted, but whether it gets to that asymptote, I don't know.
Yeah. And what are you seeing with the technology around storage? Are you seeing that to be affordable and practical for grid scale in the next 5 years, you think?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key challenges that the UK identified, probably 3 or 4 years ago, was the intermittency challenge, and the way that the UK regulatory system works, economic regulation for electricity in particular, it was necessary to have the wherewithal to put electrons onto the network when they're most needed. So the intermittency issue was one of the sticks that the industry was beaten with for a while. But what we're seeing now is the developers and the utilities are building utility scale battery parks so that they can dump the electrons onto the grid at the time of high demand, and obviously the economics stack up then. So yes, it's happening. It's not ubiquitous, but it's on the march. And the more farms which are built out, we expect to have we've got 20 gigawatts there or thereabouts as an aspiration in the next 10 years. So it's going to be a very, very important factor in that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I know that we're at about an hour because we were a little bit late with some technical difficulties. I hope if you have a few more minutes, I'd love to talk more about the cabling. You did mention that the insurance claims typically revolve around cabling issues. The fishermen are more concerned about cabling issues. Behind you, we see, a number of wind turbines in a row in that picture. And one of the things that I am concerned about is the spider web of cabling across the ocean bottom to get to land. And so are each of those turbines connected together and then connected to one giant transformer that's underwater or on some platform, and that then one cable goes from that point to some landfall? And my understanding is and I'll just give a quick background. The Energy Committee here in Connecticut put out legislation for 2,000 megawatts. That's being part of what we're seeing developed. But I think the initial infrastructure for those transmission lines are going to land somewhere on Cape Cod and Barnstable, and then connect with our infrastructure on land, and then find its way back to Connecticut. So the question is twofold. Cabling underground on the ocean bottom, that will certainly impact draggers and scallopers and lobstermen. And then infrastructure opportunities on land. Are these wires and overhead cables that we have? Did you find that UK had to really spend a lot of money to upgrade those to keep up with what they were accepting?
Yeah. I mean, it's on the cabling design front. Typically, what you'd see in a wind farm, if you just reflect back on the video, then there's about 20 turbines there on that shot. Each of the turbines is connected to the other through what's called a inter-array cable. So they're all daisy chained in together. And then there's a big export cable, and sometimes and increasingly there are two export cables. One is on a duty standby basis, so that if one fails, then they can still use the other. That export cable goes back to shore.
Okay.
So what you've got to do is to make sure that that those cables, because of fishing and because of various other ocean dynamics, that those cables are protected as best they can be. So that's why I mentioned in the presentation about using rock dumps, using mattresses on top of the cables, and in theory, that those would give some protection against any trawler action on those cables. But the more attractive option is to bury the cables once they are laid. So you put them about 2 feet into the ocean floor, into the seabed, and then they are covered over so that they are invisible and they don't get trawled. However, over time, with the erosion of the seabed, then they can become exposed. So again, it's all back around the sophistication of the cables when you lay them. So you can put smart sensors in the cables to tell you what's going on around it, for them to radio back the impact of, say, a trawler action, or for a boulder which is going along the sea floor, the ocean bed, hitting the cable, that will be registered. So there's all manner of smart asset management practices which can be brought to bear on cabling.
Okay. When you talk about cabling and moving that forward, you called it daisy chain together, and then the one turbine, I'm sorry, the one cable moving in. The impact, we have a couple of questions, the impact on wildlife.
Yeah.
You know, the burrowing of the cable, I imagine, would have some impact on wildlife. I've heard talk about the monopoles and the, you know, it's banging it on with a big hammer to get that into the ground. Is that damaging to whales in particular, or other wildlife and birds, et cetera? Can you touch a little bit on wildlife?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't really had any experience in terms of everybody does environmental impact assessments, and there's a lot of research which has been done. The likes of Woods Hole do a lot of this type of thing on the attenuation of sound from piling operations and what effect that has on sea mammals. So yeah, I mean, it's constantly monitored. There are standards which have to be conformed to minimize the potential impact, but you can never say that these things don't have an impact. You can only just gather the data to see what the impact is. So I think the scientific and science-led approach to this is the way to go. And there's lots of groups which have been set up to do just this thing. In terms of bird strikes, it's not a major issue. We found in the UK, I mean, there's more birds killed on the roads by cars hitting them than there are wind turbine blades hitting them in an ocean environment. It does happen. It's not without its risk, but also, you know, oil and gas platforms regularly encounter birds flying into them. So it is what it is in the sense that, and I'm a big ornithologist, by the way, so it's not as if we can't dismiss these things. We just got to make sure that we understand the science and how the behavior of the birds and mammals, how it changes when an asset is constructed. You know, do they change flight path? Do they change their routing? And if so, what's the impact on that? All of these types of things are the questions which are being asked and are being addressed by people who are, you know, specialists in these areas.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that, you know, there is impact, and you know, we'll just have to figure out what that is, and that's would factor into the levelized cost of energy as part of an expense to try to mitigate that to the extent we can.
And don't forget that before a wind farm is permitted, you know, all of this evidence has to be laid on the table and challenged. So there's forums which are available to do that challenging, and you know, those forums should be used, and there should be, you know, the voices of those who have concerns should be heard.
Yeah, and I think we have to, and that's why one of the reasons why I'm very grateful that you've agreed to come on and share your expertise, and I hope that we could do it again as we kind of move down the road. Our fishermen here in New London have embraced, you know, offshore wind, and kind of I've been working with them and creating their own business. You know, to the point you made about the town that you mentioned in England that had, you know, a fishing presence, and then all of a sudden had transformed itself. I think New London Seafood is beginning to do a lot of that with hiring themselves out as kind of scouts and guides and whatever.
I mean, I haven't touched upon the creation of artificial reefs, which are really popular, and fish stock tend to thrive around them. So there's all manner of spin-off benefits. But like anything, you know, when you are moving, as you saw in the video, moving through a wind farm, you just need to understand the navigation paths that you need to take. And if you do that and you keep to them, then there should be relatively few problems. It's, you know, not to say there won't be problems, but relatively few problems. And you know, we've seen that. We've seen that happening in the UK and the rest of Europe as well. So it's all there for the United States to take advantage of, with the thinking and the partnering. But ultimately, you know, the US will do it the US's way, and that's the importance of having this industry starting to take shape, that you can actually shape it.
I think we've got most of the questions on the chat. I don't know if you have anything else that you may want to add. As I said, I know you've been very generous with your time, and I don't want to
My pleasure.
you with that, but I certainly appreciate it. And I know that everybody that will have the opportunity to hear you will appreciate it, because you bring a wonderful voice and expertise to our shores here.
Well, thank you very much. There are many others who are far more expert than me in specialist areas, but the beauty of what I've been through is it's taking something which was spawned and taking it to something which is at an industrial scale now. So it's really rewarding. And I was personally involved in the development of an offshore wind farm which is slightly larger than Block Island. It's a demonstrator farm in the UK, and it was one of the first in the UK to have any turbines in the ocean. Not the demonstrator. The farm itself had 2 additional turbines which were put in the ocean in the year 2000, and it was the UK's first offshore wind farm, 2 times 2 megawatt machines. Oh, how times have changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Now they're as tall as the Empire State Building, right?
Yeah.
I mean, those are the 12 and 16 megawatt that you said. And
they're big beasts, yeah.
Yeah.
And like any asset, you've just got to manage them. And what we haven't touched upon, Senator, today is the end of their nominal life. What happens to a turbine farm? What happens to a wind farm then? It's the so-called decommissioning phase. Well, that is obviously years away, but there's a lot of thought gone into this in terms of what you do, because once you've been through a permitting process, then you're in a very advantageous area. You don't want to be going through it again unless you have to materially change that farm. So what we're likely to see is, and this is just my prediction, personal opinion, is as these farms come up to the end of their permitted period, which is typically 25, 30 years, then the number of turbines is likely to reduce, but the size of turbines will by that stage have increased, so that the yield from the farm, back to this yield point, is likely to increase, but without the environmental impact or line of sight or visual impact of the multiple turbines that we see today. That's just one person's view on how this industry is likely to go, because the fewer turbines you've got, the less maintenance you have to make, and the cheaper it becomes to operate them.
Yeah, and all of the other benefits. And what about what are these things made of? Plastics and metals and fiberglass that gets recycled, or what?
Yeah, and you've touched upon a very interesting point there. The recycling of blades, which are composites, that's a science which is now starting to emerge. And interestingly, Ørsted, you think I was an agent for Ørsted, but I'm not. I've got some good friends there, but Ørsted has just issued its blade recycling policy. So it is stockpiling blades until the recycling technologies has caught up with the blades to allow them to be taken back into their constituent components in an environmentally friendly way. So steel for the tower, so lots of steel needed. Weld integrity is an important point, and that's something that I didn't touch upon in terms of the jobs. Welders, the demand for welders will significantly spike once this industry takes hold. And so those types of skills, and the welding schools, the community colleges and all of that have got a role to play in training welders. So you're going to need lots of those. But the important point here is an interstate rivalry is not a good thing. And we had we had UK-wide rivalry, which impaired the industry for a period of time. Now it's all about collaboration, because a original equipment manufacturer, be it a blade facility or a tower manufacturer or gearbox manufacturer, is not going to have a factory in each state. It's going to have a factory to serve a number of states, and that will all come down to the economics. So it's important to understand the role that the state can play in the supply chain and what it can do to attract the right type of jobs or develop the right type of jobs into its environment. So it's just something to bear in mind when you're hearing all of the great stuff going on, that Siemens, for example, will not have a blade factory in each state along the Eastern Sea. Well, just simply won't happen. And so it's a case of where it's fit and proper to be. It will serve a hinterland and a market around it. But that's the way of the world.
We have the greatest submarine manufacturers in the world here in Groton, and they use a large amount of welders, and there are a number of support supply vendors that use welders to help to help those submarines get built. So I think with our defense industry here, we're off to a good start in generating welders. But I agree, I think there's going to be a bit of a competition to get welders from submarines and wind turbines. So we want to make sure that hopefully that's something the state can do through our our apprenticeship pipeline and workforce pipeline that we're dealing with, to try to get and encourage people to get into these jobs, which will be very well-paying jobs.
It will be. And the trade, the unions have got a big role to play in this. The trades are really important to this sector. And as I've alluded to during the course of the last hour or so, the jobs are right across the patch. It's not just on the technical and engineering and technician side. It's right across the patch.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough.
It's a pleasure. No, anytime. It's and I just long for the day when I can board that British Airways flight and get myself back into Massachusetts, and I'll pop across to see you.
And this is you have a bit of COVID going on there. Are you?
A bit of COVID. Yeah.
We talked a bit before we came on camera. It's a little bit of a spike, but most people over there are vaccinated as we are here in Connecticut. Is that?
Yeah. About 80% of the adult population is vaccinated now with two shots. So it's a good barrier. Deaths are not necessarily spiking at all. There's a few more hospitalizations of significance, but the hospitalizations aren't necessarily leading to death. So that's a good thing. But the numbers are increasing, and it's the Delta variant, as we're calling it now, the India variant, which has caused this this spike. So it's tending to hit the younger population as well, who aren't vaccinated yet necessarily. But they're resilient, and they're not necessarily succumbing in the same way that we did before the vaccination program was in place.
Yeah. And that's what's impacting the travel. There's restrictions on coming in from one to another, just for people out there to listen. So.
Yeah, I think the US is allowing US citizens to travel to the UK and the rest of Europe, but the other way we're not allowed yet. And it's because of this variant. And also, I mean, I'm trying to, as I mentioned to you before, trying to use my means to get around this to a degree. There's also the quarantining when you come into the US. It's still a requirement for overseas nationals to quarantine for a period. So it will get sorted. I mean, I'm expecting September we're probably going to be open again, and the skies will be awash with vapor trails.
It'll be helpful. Well, thank you very much, Doctor, for spending your time with us today. And we're going to get this out to as many people as possible. And for those out there, contact me, Senator Paul Formica at senatorformica.com with any questions you may have. And for me, about anything in terms of policy, but in particular, energy. I was the former co-chair of the Energy Committee here in the state of Connecticut, and I've been the ranking member for the last few years. So we've been working hard on these kind of new generational issues as we move into the next generation of energy generation. So thank you again, and I appreciate everyone joining us. And I look forward to lots of reruns on this particular item. And I wish you well, Doctor. Thank you so much. Okay. And I look forward to seeing you at NAUI and taking that course.
Okay. See you stateside. Thanks everybody that joined.